picture. I want to build a 3-wheel electric motorcycle. This is not fooling around. This is for real. Can you picture it?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Does it look like what it looks like to me?
No.
No. I actually printed it out on my computer to bring it. But it doesn't really look like it because that's only just a piece of equipment that I start with. And then I start cutting and hacking and bolting things together and making it work. How can I describe for you a 3-wheel electric motorcycle? Well, I could tell you about the wheels in the front and the windshield and but does that really get the picture in your head?
Is it closed in?
On the front, but not the sides. And then I'm going to have it wrapped with one of those special things that they do for advertising, have it wrapped with Good Shepherd stuff up over it. So when I make my pastoral calls, running around town, it'll have Good Shepherd stuff all over.
Are the 2 wheels in back or in front?
In front. 1 wheel behind.
Well, up at CVS Pharmacy, they've got little ones, 3 wheels, that you could look at with the wheels are in back.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them that have the 2 in the back because it's easier to drive them back there. But from an engineering standpoint, you want 2 wheels that are controlling your traction and your steering, rather than just 1 in the front. So, there you go. Now, that's a simple little example of what we're doing here tonight. Because when we started this project, we said we have 18 months to prepare for a new pastor. But you know what? That pastor's going to look different than Don White. So we need to have a different picture in our minds. We have to have a different picture of what the church is going to look like when that happens. How do I describe that picture for you? How do I draw that picture so that you can see what it looks like? Well, it's called vision. And what the pastor does, what the transition coach pastor does, is what they call casting a vision. There is a process that people go through as they see things differently. You can call it, there's been a whole lot of different names for it. Have you ever heard the phrase, we're having a paradigm shift? No. What it means is I'm getting a different picture in my head of what the possibilities are. But it's different than what we might expect. And if I would ask each of you around the table, what's it going to look like? You would give me, each one, an individual picture of what it's going to look like. Based on your background, based on your experience, based on the gifts that you have. Gene, very helpful today. He said, can I show you? And he brought me a whole group of bulletins and Bible study materials and things from the church that he was at up north. And this may look like some of the picture that we'll have. Some of these things may be incorporated in the new picture. But there's 2 things that we can almost always guarantee. It's going to take time to find a consensus among all of us as to what the ministry of Good Shepherd is going to be for the next phase of this history. All right? And not everybody is going to go along. That's the other half of the story. That's the second point for tonight. It's going to take a while for us to get consensus. And it's painful. And not everybody's going to go along. And we have to be ready to work with and patiently encourage each other through this time. And we could go down through it and say the word vision is used in the Bible 68 times. It's a picture of God giving someone like a calling, a mission that they are to accomplish. think the clearest one, though, is the vision that he gave to Moses. That's what I'd like to focus on tonight, is the vision that God gave to Moses, that there was going to be a land filled with milk and honey that was their land that they could return to when they came out of captivity in Egypt, out of the bondage of Egypt. Now, you and I don't think of that much as a vision, because we've been living with this for so long, it's just automatic. But imagine what it was like for the slaves in Egypt to think about a land that they owned themselves, that no one was ever going to throw them off of. Well, you understand that we're still dealing with that, but that it's going to be a land that would be theirs, that they could feed their families from the produce of this land, this good, rich, fertile, abundant land. They wouldn't have to go to somebody else, like the Pharaoh of Egypt, and ask for food to keep from starving to death, and then have the Pharaoh only give them part of what they asked for. They wouldn't have to work making bricks and have to cut the straw themselves. Remember, we talked about what a bondage that has been. Imagine what it was like to have that vision of a promised land flowing with milk and honey.
I wonder if they understood that they're going to have to fight for it.
I'm not sure they understood a lot of things.
Yeah.
All right? And fighting for it was one of those unpleasant surprises. And the fact that they still had to work. I mean, there was work in that promised land. There were stones that had to be carried off of the fields. There were crops that had to be planted. There were vineyards that had to be planted and tended. There were olive groves and things that had to be planted, and you had to dig cisterns for the water. There was a lot of work to be done. But it was theirs. And it was good. Now, when they left Egypt, Moses started on what I will call on-the-job leadership training. All right? And what he was doing in those weeks and months as they left Egypt was taking the very best and the brightest. If you want to turn to Numbers 13, if you want to do a Bible study, I'll read it for you if you want to. But what we're going to do tonight is just get an idea of what was happening. Numbers chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders, one of its brightest and best, one of its key people, one of the ones that you can really put your dependence on. These are people that you go to when something needs to get done." All right? And so at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran, and all of them were leaders of the Israelites. And here are their names. From the tribe of Reuben, Shuma, son of Zakur. From the tribe of Simon, Saphat, son of Hori. And I could go down through the rest of them, but the third one is Caleb. And then Joshua is another one down the list a little farther. And then there are a total of 12. And they're sent into the land of Canaan to look over the land and come back with a report. When they come back, what does the story tell us? You remember the story pretty well. What does the story tell us? How many thought it was a great idea to go and take the land? Joshua and Caleb said, "This is great. This is really cool." And the other 10 came back and said, "The land is beautiful, and the harvest is amazing, and the land is fertile, and the rivers run clear, and it's so special that there are giants living in the land." And we looked like grasshoppers next to them. And big, tall, fortified cities with big, solid, heavy walls. And we've never fought against a city with big, high, solid, fortified walls. How in the world can we take a land like that, where we look so small? Now, it would have been a temptation to say, well, if the vision is too big, maybe we ought to set a smaller vision. Maybe it's okay on this side of the Jordan. Maybe we don't have to go across the Jordan over there on the other side of the land where the giants are. Maybe we can stay here in the wilderness. It's not too bad over here. It's nice and warm. It gets chilly in the evening over there in the desert. But the Lord's providing us manna. He's providing us quail. Why don't we just plan on spending our time over here? Wouldn't that be more convenient? A lot less work. Wouldn't have to worry about the giants. And what are we going to do about those big tall walls? God said, no, the vision is over there in that land that I had in mind for you to be. And so until they could get the right vision in their heads, they just spent a number of decades walking around in circles until they could get God's picture in their minds. Now, what I want to do with you is, it took a long time to get that into their heads. In Exodus 12, they are sent out of Egypt in Exodus 12, and the Pharaoh says, I don't want to even see you people anymore. And so they start out toward the promised land. No one ever thought that would happen. It was a miracle. After the 10 plagues, it was a miracle that they were set free. God liberated them by his own authority and miraculous power. And in 12:31 of Exodus, Pharaoh says, I've had it. Get out of my sight. By the time they get to Exodus 15, they've already crossed the Red Sea on dry land. They've already been protected by the pillar of fire from the chariots of the Pharaoh's army. They've already watched the Pharaoh's army be drowned in the Red Sea when the waves came back together and swallowed them up. But now they're on the other side of the Red Sea, and the only water is in a pool that is poisoned. In Exodus 15:22 and following, they are actually looking at beautifully glistening water that will kill you if you drink it, and nothing else around. And all of these 12 people, all of these key leaders, had to come to Moses and say, what are you going to do? Moses is in the business of creating a vision, casting a vision. We can't get to the promised land if we don't have water. Moses, do you really understand why we have some questions about your leadership? We're a long way from the promised land and we only have one pool of water and it's poisoned, and you don't seem to have any answers. What in the world are we going to do? And Moses prays, and God said, there is a tree over there. If you cut that tree down and you throw it in the lake, the water will be clean and healthy for you to drink. Yeah, right, a tree in the water, and it's going to make the tree. Sure, that's going to work. Do you realize that 75% of the lakes do not get clean when you throw a tree in there? I have scientific verifiable facts that that doesn't happen very often. Moses was trying to show the people that God does things outside of our frame of reference, in bigger ways, in more phenomenal ways, in more miraculous ways, in more powerful ways than we can imagine. And so when we start on a program and say, okay, what's God's vision for Good Shepherd? We can, number one, figure it out on our own and use statistics and diagrams and charts and like I did here the other night. Here's the plan and here's the... But really, as phenomenal as that sounds, and people still kind of tease me about, you mean we're going to have $60,000 in the bank account in 6 months? No, you didn't hear it right. Over $60,000 in the building fund in 6 months. Do you realize that 95% of the churches don't have $60,000 appear in their building fund in the first 6 months? Yeah, I know that. We're doing leadership training because when we call the next pastor, we want to see a God plan. We don't need to see Bob's plan. We need to see a God plan. They didn't need to see Moses' plan, but Moses was talking about God's plan. He was pointing them beyond himself. See, Moses never went in the land. He didn't see the land. He was pointing beyond himself to what God was going to do for them. And it sounded super silly and stupid. And so here in Exodus 15, they have poisoned water. And they cut down the tree. I think they did it out of just sheer spite. Now I'll show you, Moses, this never has worked. In all my years, I've never seen a tree go into a lake, and then it's okay. But here, and then when they took a sip, it was clean and pure. Exodus 16, they're hungry. And all these 12 guys line up. They're the leaders of each one of the tribes. And they line up like a row of penguins in front of Moses' tent. And they said, we're hungry. The food we brought from Egypt's all either used up or spoiled. Doesn't last too long out there in the wilderness, you know. Our cattle are hungry. Children are hungry. What are you going to do? Let's do some leadership training. Let's do some leadership training. Why don't all of us go into a prayer meeting room and we'll just ask God to provide food? You would agree that that's a good idea, wouldn't you? We're good Christian people. We understand that. No, if you don't bring it to the church, you can't eat it, right? If you don't bring it to the potluck, you can't expect that just everybody's going to show up and expect that there's going to be food there. Somebody's got to prepare it. Except when they had their time and Moses went before the Lord, and the next morning they walked out and there was this honey-like substance all over the ground just after the dawn. And it was sweet to the taste. And it was satisfying to your appetite. And nobody had ever seen it before or tasted it before. And so they gathered it up and they took it home and they shared it with their family and everybody was very satisfied. And some of the folks disobeyed the instructions and took a little too much home, and the next morning they woke up and it was putrid, ugly, nasty smelling stuff. But there was more that they could go out and get for that day. Except on Friday. And then they could get enough for 2 days and it didn't spoil over the Sabbath. That's the way God provides. Leadership training. How do you learn to give up control over your life and hear what God wants to do? It won't happen for everybody, and it won't happen overnight. Someone might say, well, aren't you disappointed we don't have more people here? No, I didn't expect a lot of people here. You know why? This isn't normal. This is an abnormal situation. I told the president of my residents association what we were working on. He's not a Christian. He's an old Marine, old hard-nosed cowboy from out west. He's a bad dude. I mean, he's got bad written all over him. You can see it's written all over him. He's bad. And he said, man, I wouldn't take on a project like that. Man, I'd never take on anything like that. That's impossible. There's no way you can do that. I said, I'm sure glad your vote of confidence for us, Joe. I'm really glad to hear you testify. You know why? He's right. And then Exodus 17, they come to Moses and they said, oh, by the way, we've had manna and we're satisfied. We've had quail, now we've had meat. We're satisfied, but we got a problem. There's no water. All the jars are empty, all the baskets are empty, all of the wineskins are empty, everything's empty. And we're just about ready to die of thirst. What's going to happen? And Moses said, let's do some leadership training. How does God provide? Let's see. Here's a big stone. Maybe that'll be the answer. I'm just real sure it was 99.9% of all stones don't have water locked up inside of them. What I want to do at Good Shepherd is be that 0.001%. I want to say to people who are afraid this will never work, I understand your reservations. I understand your questions. I understand what you're thinking and what you're feeling. But this didn't happen because Bob Douglas said, I think I can do this. This didn't happen because somebody said, I'm going to show you impossible things we can do. That's not what we're doing here. I started attending this church for one reason. I promised my in-laws if they would give up the keys to their car, I would never let them miss a day at church that they wanted to attend. Oldham Anglin and Ethel May Anglin had been in 3 accidents in 3 weeks and had talked to 3 different police officers and explained why they had scuffed up somebody else's car. 3 times in 3 weeks. And I said, Olin, Ethel May, I want the keys. And I will promise you, as your son-in-law, that you will never miss a church service at your church at the time you choose. You will be there. Did I come to be the pastor at Good Shepherd? No, I didn't even tell you I was a pastor when I came in here. Someone heard me sing several weeks after I had started coming here, and they said, could you sing in the choir? Yeah, I'll sing in the choir. God has put these pieces together in a miraculous way, in a supernatural way that nobody could have engineered. God has moved and moved and moved. And you know what he's been moving? Barricades and blockades. Over and over and over again. I stand in awe that God has put these pieces together the way it is right here. Just the way that Moses did. Exodus 17. He tapped that stone with his rod and water poured out. Because Moses was such a wonderful way of searching out water in a desert land? Was he that smart? Did his staff have some sort of wondrous powers like a magic wand? Did he have powers of persuasion that would change the rock and let go of all the water? At one point in 1976, 77, we stood at the place where the water is still pouring out of the rock, right where he touched it. Still pouring out. Solid rock. I've been involved in so many churches that were so desperate. They were so weak. They were so fragile. They were so badly stressed out that they said, we will never find a pastor who will take care of us through this mess. Exodus 17:8. They're attacked. They're in a war with the Amalekites. And Moses realizes that if he stands there with his arms raised up, the Israelites win the battles. And they're just whipping the Amalekites all over. But his arms start to get tired, and as he lowers his hands down over time, the battle turns and the Amalekites start to win. And he raises his hands up again, and then the Israelites start to win, and they push him back across, and then his arms get tired, and the Amalekites go across. And then he raises his hands back up, and the Israelites go back this way, and finally he yells out to Aaron and Joshua, come and help me keep my hands up in the air. I can't do this by myself. And one grabs one side, one grabs the other side, and they hold his hands up in the air, and the Amalekites are completely whipped. That's not what a general does. Patton doesn't do that with his army. Only when God wants to show you his authority and his grace and his power, that's what we want for Good Shepherd. Bradenton needs to know that God's Spirit is present. Bradenton needs to know there's a place where God works. These people are coming down here this winter need to realize it's not just Good Shepherd, it's their churches back home that need this same message. If we can show them how God allows us to win the victories through the winter down here, they will have more encouragement. They will have more strength to go back to Bristol or Lancaster or wherever they're going back to and say, God was working. We saw it happen. It can happen here too. The world needs to know that we're not in a battle just by our own smarts, our own ingenuity, or by our own craftiness. My son is in marketing. He's very good at figuring out how to get people interested in coming to programs, and he's worked for Rio Cinemas, and he's very good at getting people in the door in the cinema, getting them in the movie theater. He's very good at that. If I do marketing at Good Shepherd, I will have failed you. I don't care if they're wall-to-wall people in this building. When I will walk out the door, if I've only done marketing, we will have failed as a church. You know why? We will not have changed people's hearts and minds. We have 12 people, and I've got all of the different things they did. They had the golden calf, and God's Spirit flamed out of the tabernacle and consumed a couple of priests that were being unfaithful, and the tabernacle moves from one place to the other. And I got all kinds of experiences here that they went through. And they stood at the Jordan River, Numbers 13, 1 to 33. And Moses said, go look it over. Tell me what you think. Joshua and Caleb had gotten the vision. Not everybody will. But Joshua and Caleb got the vision. And because 2 got the vision, and then 2 more, and then 2 or 3 more, and then a couple more, the leaders of each one of the tribes finally came to the point where they could see that land as being their land. And a few years later, standing on the Jordan River, just like they had before, they stood there and they looked on the other side and they said, it's as good as ours. We don't know how we're going to do it. We don't have all the answers. The Jordan's at flood stage, by the way. The River Jordan is a big flat plain, and the river snakes down through it. It looks like an anaconda or something, a boa constrictor kind of twisting its way down through this big flat open plain area.
Not very wide either.
It isn't just a small trickle, really. I mean, you can just about jump across it.
Yeah.
But at flood stage, it spreads out, fills that whole thing, and goes side to side, and can go for a mile or more on each side of the bank. And it moves pretty good. It's quite a roll, quite a drop from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. The river's at flood stage. And Joshua says, Moses is gone now. It's our turn. Priest holding the Ark of the Covenant, you start into the water first and we'll follow you. Yeah, like this was a great time for me to choose to be a priest. What a vocational choice that was. Die with this, case on our shoulders, and we walk into the river flood stage, ripping down through the territory. But as soon as they put their feet in the water, the flow of the Jordan River stopped, and it moved side to side, and the entire floodplain began to open up, and they walked straight through the river on dry ground. And they got down into the middle of the bottom of the deepest part of the river, and each one of these men picked up a giant stone that was to represent their individual tribe out of the middle of the river and carried it all the way over into the plain on the other side, and they built an altar with it, a memorial altar that said, no matter what the obstacle is, when God wants something accomplished, we can do it.